Hello, this is Joshua for Frost Dragon Designs, and today I'd like to talk to you about my Geology cat, hard enamel pin. This pin is part of my larger Cats Doing Science project. Now let's get into the design. So geology is a pretty vast field, and I know it's got a lot of different subsets to it, but I happen to love rocks, I happen to love crystals. So I knew immediately when I wanted to do a geology cat that I wanted it to be a cat standing next to a very large geode. And I happened to have a preference for amethyst looking crystals, so I decided this was going to be an amethyst geode. Now, if you didn't know, amethyst is actually a variation of a quartz crystal. Quartz is made of oxygen and silicon. Now, when some of the silicon is replaced by iron when the crystals are forming, it turns purple, making amethyst. Now, I believe that amethyst can be found as free-form crystals as well as inside of geodes. And I just thought that this design would be more fun using a geode instead of a large, just freestanding cluster of crystals. And part of the reason for that is because I have recently been experimenting with using glitter in some of my pin designs, and while I wanted to have illustrated crystals around the edge of the geode shape, I was pretty sure that I would be able to use glitter in the center mass of the geode to kind of show and imply all of those little faceted faces on the crystals that would be completely lining the interior of that geode. I'd be able to show those facets with them kind of reflecting light without having to actually draw each individual facet and turning the pin into just a mass of tiny cells that needed to be filled with enamel. I thought that using glitter in that center space would allow for a much bigger visual impact while making production of the pin itself much simpler. As you can see, I was toying with the idea of having two halves of the same geode, like it was just sliced in half and he was examining both halves of it. But I didn't really like the way that that looked visually. And I think part of the reason was because at this point, with the way those edges were just so smooth and clean, it almost made it look like a purple potato that had been sliced in half. So I went back to the idea of it just being a single half, and then I thought, well, maybe we can do something like he's got a magnifying glass and he's examining the crystalline structure. In the end, I ended up removing that magnifying glass, which I'm very glad that I did, because I then later, when creating the archaeology pin design, really wanted to use a magnifying glass. And I may have felt that it was kind of duplicative to have it in both pin designs, so I'm glad I ended up not doing that. But that smooth edge of the rock was still annoying me visually. I know that like a lot of times when you buy geodes and you know that are sliced open, it is a nice smooth polished edge, and that makes for great presentation of a physical object, but it made for very boring visual presentation to me. So I decided I was going to try to have it be more of a broken shape instead of a cut shape. If you've ever bought like a geode kit, I've done a couple of these with my kids. You basically buy a kit that comes with geodes, and you use a chisel and a hammer, and you basically just crack them open. And the edges on those geodes are obviously much more of a jagged shape because it's broken rock. Now, I've never gotten a geode from one of those kits that looks very nice. They're usually just normal quartz, sometimes yellow. There's usually not a big void in the middle. They're usually kind of just crystals that are all mashed up together. But I like the natural jagged shape that the edge takes on when you break them open with like a chisel and a hammer and you don't cut or polish them. I think that adds some visual interest, and I thought that would be a good addition for this specific pin design, especially since this cat is more about the studying of the geology, not necessarily just the display of it. The outside of the geode itself, the kind of rock formation on there, was another challenging point when I was working on this pin design. Knowing that rocks are jagged and not smooth like a potato, I wanted it to have some sort of texture or variation in the outside of it. And so I did my best with that. It's hard when you have to work with solid fill colors to get kind of a textured feel and appearance to things. You have to kind of rely on jagged edge shapes and then just big masses of color. So while I didn't want to have like a ton of different colors on the outside of the geode, I figured if I at least had two, I could show kind of a variation that would, help imply that it's textured and not smooth. I was still honestly concerned that this was going to end up looking like a big purple potato, but I know that glitter can really add a big visual punch. It's got a very specific look to it, and I was fairly confident that once I had glitter in that central mass of purple, it would no longer look like a potato. It would take on the visual look and feel of a crystalline structure. And I was absolutely right. I have seen a sample photo from my production partner, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. And if the physical pins look half as good as that photo, I think we'll all be very excited to have these pins. Overall, this was an interesting challenge, trying to bring the natural look and feel of both crystals and the rough texture on the outside of the geode to life in pin form. I feel like I did a pretty good job of it, and I feel like I might want to do some more crystal type designs coming up in the future. One of my RPG cats actually had an amethyst crystal bow, which I know doesn't make sense. Crystal doesn't bend. You need something that bends for a bow. But I really loved the way it looked, and I think I might do a couple more crystal kitties in my Black Cat RPG universe. And doing this pin design certainly gave me a boost in my confidence in the ability to illustrate crystalline type structures in enamel pin form. So thank you very much for spending some time with me today. If you liked watching this process and hearing me talk about it, please go ahead, like, and subscribe. I put out at least one video a week, 2 at the moment, and I'd love to have you along for the next one. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.